Hey guys, Morphologist here.
What's up guys, it's Wasted Space.
And today on Patchology we're talking about update 1.103, but only briefly.
Yeah, there was not a huge amount in 1.103 for us to talk about. In reality, Keen have made it a little bit difficult to get this series off the ground as far as interesting stuff coming out is concerned, but you know, there were a few bits in there that are pretty cool. The G menu fix is probably worth noting. It is noticeably faster to get that thing up, but it's quality of life stuff in reality.
So the real news probably coming this week is gonna have to be the video that actually came out with the update. And it had a number of interesting things in it.
Yeah, there was, in particular, I'm sure everyone noticed some really crazy rocket footage. And, well, most importantly, some footage of some engines that we haven't seen before. And the question is, what exactly do these engines do? Why are they being shown in this rocket environment, and what is it about those engines that are different from our current engines?
Now, the way they've named them, atmospheric engines, and the way they've set up the video, it would appear to me that it has to do something with some sort of atmospheric high thrust output engine that will help you get off planets when you start off on them by building on them. Something that has far more output than your standard thruster that we have now. However, I don't know what the drawbacks are, and we can only really speculate what they are, but they do look pretty interesting.
Yeah, I noticed a few things from the video. The first thing I noticed is if you go through various bits of the video, you can see that these engines clearly have variable thrust. There's a point where the rocket, whatever you want to call it, is still on the ground, but there is a very large thrust sort of line, whatever you want to call it, the graphic out the back of the thrusters is pretty big. And yet at other times it is clearly quite a lot smaller, so it looks to me like they have some sort of variable thrust to them. The only other thing I'm wondering is what powers them. They're in quite big housings, you notice. It very much resembles a proper rocket, Kerbal Space Program style staging, individual bits of the rocket. Does that mean that these are liquid fuel powered, maybe? Does this mean that they're solid fuel powered, maybe? Stuff that you fuel once and then have to ditch because from that point on they're useless.
If that's so, that would be really interesting, and it probably would be a resource, I would guess, that you could find on planets. Hopefully. Otherwise, what's the point, right? But it does add, I think, something to space engineers.
Well, maybe that's the idea. You notice, I mean, the ship itself does have some standard thrusters right at the top on the little pod that's designed to operate in space. But it does raise that question. Either these thrusters' purpose is because they're made, like you say, they're made from a resource that is available on planets but not available elsewhere, and thus you need these thrusters really to be a practical way of getting off the planet. Maybe uranium is super rare on a planet's surface, and so you need some sort of other fuel to get you off there. Or, vice versa, these are there to offer some sort of extra power over normal thrusters, which makes me wonder, does that mean that they're about to change how normal thrusters work in a natural gravity environment? Because right now, getting off a planet with normal thrusters is, I mean, it's not super easy, but it's doable. It's definitely doable. It's not like you need some kind of new thruster in order to achieve it. So it's very intriguing.
It may be a little bit worrying, I think, to the community, because if this means that the thrusters we have now may not be enough to get off planet surfaces, all of these things that we've been building for however long we've known that planets would be coming out will be essentially useless on planets. They will have to be completely redesigned with the new thrusters in mind, with the new fuel system in mind, in order to operate. Which I guess is, there are pluses and there are negatives. Like, it makes the game much more interesting, but at the same time it does, and it will frustrate a lot of players, and is my general feeling.
Well, with some of it's worth mentioning, to be honest, that with some of the changes that have been coming recently, and some of these are something that we're going to talk about a bit later on as well, they have made sufficient changes that a lot of the old designs that are out there, a lot of the old stuff that people have made, are no longer viable. For whatever reason, there are things that have meant that due to the thruster change or the cargo weight change, or there's any number of changes that have come along recently, people's older ships are no longer quite so useful as they used to be. So from that respect, perhaps, this is to be expected when the game is moving forward. But I also, arguing on the positive side of things, this to me looks very much like Kerbal Space Engineers.
It does, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I think a lot of people who play that game, Kerbal Space Program, do play Space Engineers as well, because it's sort of developed its own niche, because there's like a sort of science fiction side to it as well. I think that's been developing with Space Engineers, which probably wasn't originally in the game. But it's hard for me to talk about that without knowing exactly what their original intention was. So yeah, it does bring it closer. Another thing I want to note, though, before we move on about the video was the atmosphere of the planet did reveal clouds. And we did talk about that in an earlier episode where we saw, clouds in the background. And we speculated, hey, there could actually be clouds on planets now. And the video pretty much says, yep, there are clouds. And that's pretty cool for me, I think, at least, to see those sort of atmospheric effects.
There are clouds and they are animated and they look so much better than some of those earlier iterations of what the atmosphere looked like. It's really cool to see that. I just want to touch briefly on something else I noticed in that video, that this is very conjecture based now, because this is something that I think I've spotted something. Whether or not that's 100% true, I don't know. But if you look at the central thruster on the rocket, so there's one big thruster in the middle of the rest, and all of them are connected up by connectors and conveyors, which makes me think that they probably require some sort of external fuel, which is where the liquid fuel things come from. But the other thing the middle thruster have that's different to the rest of them, it's not square. It is an octagonal shape, and it's an octagonal shape with blocks alongside it that match that octagonal shape. And that gets me kind of intrigued, because this is, as far as I'm aware, the first time that they've introduced a block that is not only not a standard shape, but doesn't fill up a full cube. Now, as I said, this is completely conjecture. This is just from observing the thing, but it looked interesting to me. There's some funny blocks alongside it. I'll try and put some screenshots up showing what I mean, but I'll be interested to see what you guys think of this, because it looks different to me.
Indeed, and on the note of planets, I think we should talk about also the disappointment that was expressed by a lot of the community this time around. I think a lot of people may have been expecting planets to come out this week, judging by the hype that was put forward by Keen Software House.
Yeah, Marek has been hyping it up quite a lot on Twitter of late, posting, planets will be soon and all sorts of stuff like that. And I think a lot of people have built themselves up to this idea that the planets was going to be now. Which, you can say, Keen never said the planets were going to be this week. But you can also most definitely argue for the fact that they made some pretty serious hints to the fact that planets were really close. And people are so hyped from it. And a lot of people are saying, well, this is not a cool way of treating your community. This is wrong way of going about it. And I kind of think maybe it's a slightly different thing. Maybe and I hate to say this, but maybe it's a little bit of naivety from Keen's side of things, where they've got something super cool that they're very, very hyped about themselves, and they can't help but talk about it. And perhaps they did talk about it too soon. But, I suspect it's only from the best intentions. Yeah,
I think so. I think they wanted to let everyone know that they were working hard on something that everyone's been waiting for a long time, and I think it ended up coming out probably worse than they hoped. When you say soon, it's so, I hate to say it, but the community is really sick of hearing that word. It has such a bad and negative connotation now with so many other independent developers.
In my mind, it immediately just has a TM at the end.
Yeah.
Of it. That is the thing.
Yeah, and it's just been so overused. I think, from now on, if you're going to use that as part of your PR campaign, you got to give people a little bit more of a time frame, even if you still want to be pretty vague, but some sort of time frame is far better than saying soon, which is such a subjective word. I mean, soon has been 3-4 years for like EVE Online, which they were talking about Incarna way back then, where you could walk around in stations. That thing, it's still coming soon, and it's been 4 years. So you got to be really a little bit more specific and not so vague with when you use that word.
Definitely, and I think perhaps it's in particular one of the problems that Keen have had over the years, and maybe are getting a bit better at now than they ever have been. But it's something where when they have a cool idea that they're excited about, they tell us about it immediately. They get very excited, and as soon as that idea is on the plate, we've talked about this before, but as soon as that idea is come up with and they're keen, they know they want to do it, that's when we hear about it. And I think, Planets was probably the last time that's happened. Everything I've seen recently with some of the chats we've had with the developers that we've talked about on Patchology before, all this stuff has suggested that they're now becoming a lot more coy about telling people about stuff they're working on.
I would use the word humble, I think, actually.
Humble could be another way of putting it, definitely.
And that's a much better approach, because there's so many developers right now that are just out there, like, showing off their wares, and then they don't deliver, and everyone's gotten very sick of it, to be honest. People are getting sick of wasting their money on games that never get finished in development. But I don't want to... Keen is not one of these developers. I really want to say this now. I really strongly believe that Keen is a better development company than a lot of the other independent developers out there that I'm not going to name, that promised things and never delivered, and then the game just lost development altogether. So
yes, certainly, and that was probably why I used the word coy rather than anything else, is simply because I felt that none of this is being motivated other than a probably quite warranted excitement about what they're capable of achieving and what they believe they can achieve. I'd say coy, it's almost in a childlike fashion, and I mean absolutely no offense by this, but it's just, I just look at some developers that are very, very excited about the game they're creating and want to tell people about it ASAP. And unlike perhaps some of the other ones where this is sort of financially motivated, and I could potentially argue the idea that maybe there has been some financially motivated decisions in Keen's past, but I do believe right now all there is just a lot of excitement about the fact that actually they're starting to achieve goals that they didn't really believe themselves that they were going to be able to achieve.
Indeed, and in that respect, I do want to say this, though, as well, before we move on, and it's important, that they wouldn't say soon, quote-unquote, unless they felt that it was going to be soon. The reason we're talking about giving them more credit for, them delivering in the past and saying that they're a different kind of developer than maybe some of you are used to is to say that, don't worry, guys, soon probably means within the next few weeks.
Well, if nothing else, Keen's second birthday is coming up soon, I believe. Space Engineer's second birthday is coming up soon. So, who knows? Maybe that's just a coincidence, or maybe that's some kind of prophecy. We shall see.
Indeed. So, now that we've talked about what we've seen in the video, let's talk about the less obvious changes that have happened in Space Engineers, specifically to do with grav changes. Grav generator changes, and artificial mass cube changes. Now, Wasted, you've had a bit of experience with this. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. Again, I have to go back to stories from the stream, but I was trying to make a gravity launch ship. Well, not a gravity launch, it was a jump ship. Anyway, end point was it had some of those launch tubes that we've all used at some point, I'm sure. They're a very cool concept. Stick a mass block on a ship, put some gravity generators behind it, and you can use that to accelerate the ship really quickly and make a tube with which you can launch your fighters out. And it's a pretty established technique by now. People are using it all over the place. Or cannons.
I was the first one to make a video, by the way, about that. Just want to point that out.
Yeah, get it out there. But gravity has been a thing we've been using for fun tasks for a long while. And what's changed is that the force that a gravity generator will exert on an artificial mass block or a space ball when it's attached to a ship has been dramatically reduced. Now, what I can't tell you is whether or not it's just a flat reduction, like it just does 10% of what it used to do. In fact, from experience, it wouldn't even be 10%, it would be like 2%. It's that dramatic. Or whether it's very, very mass related, I can't tell you yet. All I know is that I was testing it with some reasonably light fighters. So these are not heavy ships, and I ended up with 7 5-ton space balls on the front of this ship, 4 gravity generators, so 4G of force pushing these 7 space balls, and the acceleration was about 0.2 meters a second per second. In comparison, that would have had it 104 meters a second within a few meters previously. So this is a dramatic change, and the consequences and why exactly this change has been made, I think, are kind of interesting.
So yeah, let's talk about first why. I think we both have mixed feelings, so let's talk about why this isn't a good thing at first. And then we can talk about the positives to this and why it's probably been added. the first thing that comes to mind, and something you've already touched on, is launch tubes and artificial gravity drives. I did tutorials on both, and now you may not feel great about one of them. I think not everyone's comfortable with the gravity drive because it just doesn't seem to make much sense. But the launch tubes, on the other hand, I feel really upset. I'm gonna be very honest here that you can't do launch tubes anymore effectively. You have to use just general thrusters, but that was never the point. The point was to accelerate a ship to a very high velocity in a short distance so that you could get it free of the ship and free of enemy oncoming fire. And that's the whole point of it. We don't have any alternative ejection system. There are no rails in the game. There's no high accelerating piston to push it through. There's no like catapult system. That was our only way of catapulting ships out of larger ships. And now that's been taken from us. So I feel like our abilities to create things using gravity and manipulating gravity has been greatly reduced, and that to me is just heartbreaking.
And in that respect, I'm 100% with you. You know, I have for a long time very much enjoyed making things that utilize gravity to do very cool stuff. You know, it was a piece of functionality that, while it didn't make a huge amount of sense as far as physics is concerned, you know, even gravity generators themselves don't make a huge amount of sense as far as physics is concerned. But what it did do was fill in the gap that a lot of mechanical components would be needed to fill otherwise. It enabled us to make things, it gave us this way of, as you say, creating a very, very quick propulsion method. It gave us a way of slowing things down very quickly. It gave us a way of controlling things within an area using multiple gravity fields. You know, there's all sorts of different purposes you could put it to. And these were all there because in reality we lacked some of the other things that would enable us to do the same tasks. You know, compression systems, dampers, all this sort of stuff that you think, you know, that's in reality what you would actually have to use to achieve the same result. But we don't have those things, so we're using gravity for it. And it kind of, in that respect, it felt okay. It felt semi-right because while, yeah, it's called gravity, you could sort of pretend it wasn't gravity, and in reality it was some specific tool made for this task. So that's kind of been removed from us now, and from that respect it's sad, but at the same time it has come with, as we showed in the last video for example, some pretty dramatic changes to how the autopilot system works, which was one of the things we used to use gravity to replace. You know, it's that sort of stuff. So maybe, and sort of maybe leading into the positive side of things, maybe there are some elements of this that have been counterweighed by some of the fixes we've had recently, and maybe there's some elements of this that are there for a reason.
And if I may speculate for a moment, and I think you may agree with me, the reason for this is most likely to do with planets. I would say with 80-90% certainty it has to do with planets, because as we discovered when we were building on a planet's surface, and this was a source code planet, so let me remind you guys, this wasn't the developer version and this wasn't what they're working on now. We constructed a gravity generator and created a negative field so that we could float above our ships. It could very well be that they don't want this to happen because, of course, if you could do this with gravity generators, then what's the point of building things with thrusters? What's the point of building scaffolding? What's the point of any of that when you could just use a gravity generator?
More importantly, what's the point of these brand new thrusters they've just introduced that seem to offer greater atmospheric thrust? So I think in reality that while this seems like a pretty negative thing to start off with, there's going to be a lot of people, myself included, that are going, damn, that's a whole bunch of my designs now that don't do what they used to do. You know, they are now, for all intents and purposes, either useless or in bad need of redesigning. But at the same time, I think it is leading towards a change to how space engineers, not how space engineers plays, but the depth of space engineers that is beyond what Keen originally announced as far as planets was concerned. I think these little glimpses of clouds and this little talk of atmospheric friction and so on is actually leading towards something that is, as I've said earlier in this episode, they're being a little bit coy about because they're scared of talking too much about it too early, but is going to surprise all of us.
Indeed, I second that. I think that there's definitely something more here under the surface that we can't yet read. That being said, I do hope that they do find a way to bring back gravity propulsion in some way, perhaps greatly limited, but maybe more effective in space, into space engineers, because I think there are too many creations that exist and too many people that have used gravity propulsion and gravity acceleration to say that it just is gone now. And to take that is like ripping the rug out from beneath your feet. I do want these atmospheric thrusters, and I do want it to be more difficult to escape from a planet's surface. I want there to be more effort and more of a, more of an interesting build-up.
Immersion to it, more realism to it. Make you feel more like it is actually a planet rather than, an asteroid that's a bit bigger and has some grass on it.
But at the same time, I do still want some of the benefits that we had from gravity generators whilst in space. Now, a way you may balance this, and I don't know much about coding, and I imagine this would be quite difficult, would just to be that gravity generators don't operate in the same way as mass gravity works, and that it's not very effective on the planet surface, but it can be very effective in space. And that would make a lot of sense. I think. I mean, you could sort of reasonably argue that that's how it would work, but I don't know. And that's something I think that you guys can share your opinions on. What are your feelings about gravity generators not being as effective anymore, and what do you think could be done to balance it in light of planets coming very soon?
Yeah, where do they fit in the space engineers world? Because they have always been, and especially since they announced planets, a bit of a strange one in that they just didn't fit in the grand scheme of how space engineers worked. Everything else was pretty well grounded in Newtonian physics. And then you've got these blocks that are capable of generating Earth-equivalent gravity fields with no obvious movable parts, and they're tiny. And they are also capable of affecting themselves with mass, because that makes sense. So they've always been something that was in space engineers and seemed kind of out of place, and we have just got used to accepting they're there and making the best of them. So it would be very interesting to see what you guys think about, what is the right place for them? Do we lean towards that realism side? Do we lean towards the fun side? Where does the overall fit?
Alright guys, well thank you for joining us this time on Patchology, and as always, make sure to leave us some comments in the comment section to let us know what your thoughts are on this week's Patchology, the subject, and what your opinions are on gravity generators. We're interested to know. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, you guys are always awesome. We always read your comments even if we don't get a chance to reply to them all, so very interested to hear what you guys have to say. So thanks for coming guys, catch you next time.